Welcome to an installment of Apocalyptic April. I'm going to be reviewing 3 films that were made in the 1980s during the Cold War that foretold or forewarned of the consequences of nuclear war. And you may be saying to yourself, gee, Sean, that's a very cheery subject for a series of movie reviews. Well, when I look around and I see current events, I see things aren't much better now than they were during the Cold War. So my hope is that if history does repeat itself, things will warm up and peace will be returning to the world so these films can remain fiction. Enjoy. Hey everybody, Sean from Movie Assault here. It's time once again for another movie review. This time around, I'm going to be taking a look at The Day After from 1983. This was directed by Nicholas Meyer, written by Edward Hume, and stars Jason Robards, JoBeth Williams, Steve Guttenberg, John Lithgow, and a number of other people. It's got a really big cast, but it aired on ABC TV back in 1983, and this is the Blu-ray that I purchased on eBay. This is actually a Spanish Blu-ray, but thankfully it comes with reversible artwork, so I can display it in English, but you can see the disc in the inside artwork is in Spanish. But anyway, The Day After aired in 1983, and I remember when it aired on ABC. It was in the fall of 1983. And thinking back on the movie, I didn't really remember a whole lot about the movie itself other than 2 things. There's a scene where snow falls after the nuclear blast. It's like a nuclear winter, and there's snowflakes coming down. I thought that was really strange. And there's a line about cockroaches outliving humanity. But what I do remember about the film is that everybody I know watched it. It was a tremendous event. People were talking about it the next day. It was one of those, what they call water cooler moments where people are talking about something the next day. Because back then, everybody watched the same stuff at the same time because we didn't have this fragmentation of audiences like we do now with YouTube and streaming and whatever. But don't want to get into that. But what I will say is that it did leave a huge impression on me, not only in how it depicted a nuclear holocaust, but it also kind of changed the way I looked at the government. And one thing I noticed watching it again in 2026 for the first time in 43 years is that at the credits, as the credits roll, the film makes its intention clear that it was created to show the horrors of nuclear war in the hopes of discouraging world leaders from ever letting it happen. And reportedly 62%, I also saw 67% of American television audiences were tuned to this show, to this movie, when it aired on ABC. 6 years later, the Cold War, which made this whole scenario plausible that we would have a nuclear war against the Soviet Union, ended. And whether or not The Day After had an impact on that, I couldn't tell you, but I'm sure it definitely made an impact on the American public and their opinion of escalations, towards nuclear armament and whatnot. But about the movie itself, the story takes place in Lawrence, Kansas, and that is around Kansas City, Missouri. It's literally right in the heart, the middle of the United States. So the film depicts sort of a snapshot of the Midwest in 1983. And we're introduced to a wide range of characters. There's Dr. Russell Oakes, who's played by Jason Robards. We meet his family. We meet a group of Air Force mechanics, including an airman, Billy McCoy. There's the Dahlberg family, and they're preparing for their daughter's wedding. We also meet hospital staff that work with Dr. Oakes, college students, including Steve, who's played by Steve Guttenberg, and professors, one including John Lithgow. The film introduces a number of characters, and it clearly wants to represent as many walks of life as it possibly can, at least as things existed in 1983. But all of the characters over the course of their introductions are noticing and paying attention to escalating tensions over in West Berlin. The East German army has blockaded West Berlin. Things are getting tense. And it's sort of lingering in the background, but all the characters go about their daily lives. But then the situation worsens and the military conflicts intensify. Moscow is evacuated and the fighting spreads to the Persian Gulf, and eventually nuclear weapons are used. Panic sets in, people rush to grocery stores and panics buy, they flee the cities or they shelter in their homes. And then comes the film's most chilling sequence, and that is when missiles launch from silos across the American Midwest. If you don't know anything about how the United States stores their nuclear weapons, all across the United States there are these missile silos, and underground there are nuclear missiles. Well, they all take off, and this is sort of a recreation. This doesn't actually appear in the movie, but this will give you an idea of what it looks like. You see all these missiles tearing out of the ground on their way to destroy the Soviet Union. And it's really kind of a haunting image, and it's probably the most chilling scene in the film, the most chilling sequence, because it means one thing, that the end has already begun. Now, whether the United States launch first or is retaliating really doesn't matter. Lawrence, Kansas has about 30 minutes before everything changes. And that's really the core of the day after, showing what happens next. Even the film itself admits via a postscript in the final credits that the destruction is toned down so a story can actually take place. What we do see, though, is grim enough. Survivors suffer radiation burns, they lose their hair, slowly die from starvation. Others face starvation because the food supply has collapsed. There's even a moment where some farmers are meeting after and they're trying to decide what to do with their farms, and they're told that they should just scrape off the soil, 4 or 5 inches of topsoil that's contaminated, and plant their crops. And one farmer asks, and where are we supposed to put the soil? It's one of the film's most grounded scenes, and it really gives you an impact or an idea of the impact of how this is going to change things in the United States or in the world. That you really can't escape the destruction, even if something literally looks like it hasn't been touched. Technically, the film holds up better than you might expect. There wasn't CGI back in 1983, so the effects are accomplished with the use of stock footage, matte paintings, animation, and all sorts of different practical techniques. But even more than 4 decades later, it still holds up and looks convincing. Most of it. Admittedly, some does not. It's not perfect, but it works, and it does convey, the damage and the impact of nuclear war. That said, the film today still feels a bit uneven. At its core, it's really kind of a mediocre family drama that's interrupted by a nuclear war. There are concepts like electromagnetic pulses and radiation sickness and fallout that are introduced in the dialogue in a way that just feels really clunky. It also juggles way too many characters, which slows things down, especially at the beginning. The film feels a little longer than it actually is, and I understand why they did that, because they wanted to give everybody sort of a representation in the film, or at least as many people as possible. So there are, middle class, blue collar workers, white collar people, that kind of stuff. So does the real important question, and the reason I'm making this series, is does this movie still have an impact in 2026? And I still think it does. Back in 1983, it introduced people to the realities of nuclear war. Today, those ideas are more familiar. Audiences probably aren't going to be as shocked by the imagery that this showed back in 1983, because back then it really impacted audiences. But the central message still hits, that a nuclear exchange doesn't just destroy cities, it destroys any version of life as we know it. It also raises an interesting question about how would a modern version look. If they remade this film today with today's changing political landscape and the technology that we have, because there's obviously no cell phones or internet or anything to get information from, although none of that stuff would work if there was a nuclear war, maybe the outcome would be a little different, or the opinion of people would be a little different. I don't know. Is it a great movie? No, but it still hits hard, even if that impact has sort of softened over time. Is it worth watching? Maybe. If you have the option, I'd recommend watching Threads instead. It's a 1984 film that follows similar type of idea in a British setting. It has a lot less melodrama, and the realism is much more brutal. It's much more graphic. But to be honest, both films feel kind of dated these days. For, the people that have watched movies have seen the world be destroyed in movies like Terminator 2, Judgment Day, the day after tomorrow, which has a similar name but very different content, Independence Day. We've seen the world be blown up by nuclear weapons, aliens, all sorts of stuff. But those are kind of spectacle movies. But The Day After really isn't about spectacle. It's about a warning. And hopefully showing a grounded, non-fantasy version of nuclear devastation would be enough to dissuade people from letting it happen again. So overall, still has an impact, but it's not a great movie, admittedly. The Day After, I'm giving it a 6.5 out of 10. There you go. That's my review of The Day After. And as always, thank you for watching to the end of the video. I appreciate your attention span. Next up will be my review of Testament from 1983 as well. And that will conclude Apocalyptic April. So stay tuned for that. And as always, please comment below and share your thoughts. Did you see The Day After when it was aired on TV originally? Have you watched it since? Do you plan to? Let me know. And as always, take it easy.